to Disneyland with my friends. People were smiling, kids laughing, and the rides looked so much fun. But something felt off, like when your gut says something's wrong. We decided to try the Haunted Mansion ride first. The line was long, but we didn't mind. As we got closer, I noticed the statues outside the mansion had strange, eerie smiles. It gave me the creeps. Inside it was dark, and the only light came from dim candles. The paintings on the walls changed when you looked away. One moment it was a happy family. The next, they were skeletons. My friends didn't seem to notice, but I did. Next was the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. It's supposed to be fun, right? But as our boat sailed along, I saw real skeletons in the water. I freaked out, but my friends laughed it off. They said it was just decorations. We decided to eat lunch, but even the food looked weird. It had this strange glow and the taste was off. I felt sick, but my friends kept eating. Then we went to the It's a Small World ride. The dolls there were singing, but their voices were distorted like they were in pain. I closed my eyes, but the music kept playing in my head. It wouldn't stop. We wanted to leave, but the park seemed to go on forever. The pathways twisted and turned, leading us in circles. It was like a maze, and there was no way out. Night fell, but the park stayed open. The lights were flickering, and the laughter turned into whispers. My friends started acting strange, like they were under a spell. They kept repeating the same words over and over like broken records. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. The park had drained its battery. We stumbled upon a carousel, and I thought maybe it was a way out. But the horses on it had human eyes, and they followed me as I walked by. I ran away, but my friends stayed behind, riding the carousel, their faces frozen in fear. I found myself in a dark corner of the park, and there I saw a figure. It was a man, dressed like a Disney character, but his face, it was twisted and contorted like he was in pain. He reached out to me and I screamed. I ran and ran, not knowing where I was going. The park seemed to go on forever, and I was trapped in this nightmare. Finally, I reached the castle at the center of the park. It was tall and imposing with dark, forbidding spires. I climbed the steps and entered, hoping to find some way out. Inside, there was a room filled with mirrors, but the reflections were all wrong. They showed me as a withered old version of myself, trapped in this nightmarish place forever. Then I heard a voice behind me. It was the man from before, the one dressed like a Disney character. He said, "Welcome to Disneyland, where dreams turn into nightmares." I turned around, and his face, it was my face, twisted and contorted in pain. I screamed, but no sound came out. And then, I woke up. I was back in my own bed, safe and sound. It was just a dream, I thought, relieved. But as I got up, I noticed something on my nightstand. It was a Mickey Mouse doll, but its smile, it was strange, eerie, just like the one I saw in that twisted Disneyland. I realized then that I hadn't escaped the nightmare. It had followed me home, and it was here to stay. I once went to Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, with my family. It was a sunny day, and I was excited to see all my favorite characters. But as the day went on, things took a strange turn. We started in Fantasyland, where I saw Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. They were smiling, but there was something odd about their eyes. They looked empty, like there was no life behind them. I thought it was just my imagination. Next, we went to Adventureland. The Pirates of the Caribbean ride was my favorite, but this time it felt different. The pirates looked real, too real. Their grins were sinister, and their laughter sent shivers down my spine. We decided to take a break and have lunch. I got a hot dog, but when I took a bite, it tasted like something rotten. I spat it out and told my parents, but they said it was fine. I felt like I was the only one who noticed something was wrong. We went on more rides, but each one seemed to get scarier. The Haunted Mansion was the worst. The ghostly figures that usually made me giggle were now terrifying. They whispered in my ear, telling me to stay with them forever. I wanted to leave, but my parents insisted on staying until the fireworks show. As the sun began to set, the park got even darker. The once colorful lights now cast eerie shadows. When the fireworks started, they weren't the usual bright and cheerful display. Instead, they exploded in a shower of black and red sparks. It looked like the sky was bleeding. I screamed, but no one else seemed to notice. Finally, the fireworks ended, and my parents agreed it was time to go home. I was relieved, but as we walked out of the park, I looked back at the castle. It wasn't the magical, beautiful castle I remembered. It was twisted and dark, like something out of a nightmare. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the lifeless eyes of Mickey and Minnie, hearing the sinister laughter of the pirates, and feeling the cold breath of the ghosts. I knew something was terribly wrong with Disneyland. The next day I tried to tell my friends about my experience, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just my imagination running wild. So I decided to go back to Disneyland alone to prove I wasn't crazy. As I walked through the park, I noticed that everything seemed normal. The characters were smiling, the rides were fun, and the food tasted good. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had just been tired or hungry the day before. But then, as the sun began to set, I saw the castle again. It was still dark and twisted, and I knew I wasn't imagining things. I had to find out what was going on. I decided to sneak into the castle. It was a risky move, but I had to know the truth. As I walked through its dark corridors, I heard whispers all around me. The voices were low and haunting, and they seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. I reached the heart of the castle and found a room I had never seen before. It was filled with mirrors, and in each mirror I saw a different version of myself. Some were smiling, but others were twisted and grotesque. Suddenly, the mirrors shattered, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned around to see a figure, tall and shadowy. It had the shape of Mickey Mouse, but it was anything but friendly. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its voice sent chills down my spine. It told me that Disneyland was cursed, that the happiness was all a facade. The park was built on an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the restless dead now haunted it. They fed on the joy of the visitors, twisting it into something dark and sinister. I tried to run, but the figure grabbed me. Its touch was icy cold, and I felt myself being pulled into the mirror. I screamed, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back outside the castle, but it was morning again. It was as if the whole night had never happened. I ran out of the park and never looked back. I tried to tell my parents what had happened, but they didn't remember anything unusual about our trip to Disneyland. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure. Disneyland is not the happiest place on Earth. It's the most haunted. I love Disneyland. It's where dreams come true, or so they say. But what happened to me there was no dream. It was a nightmare. Last summer, my family and I decided to visit the magical world of Disneyland. I was excited, imagining all the fun rides and delicious cotton candy. The sun was shining and the crowds were buzzing with excitement. We entered the park, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was like stepping into a fairy tale. The colorful buildings, friendly characters, and joyful music made me forget about everything else. We started with the rides, going on the roller coasters and spinning teacups. It was all laughter and smiles. As the day turned into evening, something strange started to happen. The park became quieter. The once cheerful characters had a weird look in their eyes, like they were hiding something. I thought I was imagining things, but then I saw it. Mickey Mouse, usually the friendliest of them all, had a twisted grin on his face that sent shivers down my spine. I decided to explore on my own for a bit. The park was different at night, eerie and unsettling. I wandered into an area that looked abandoned. The lights flickered and the air grew cold. I could hear whispers, but no one was around. Then I saw her, a girl about my age, standing near the carousel. She had long dark hair that covered her face. I couldn't see her eyes. She whispered something I couldn't quite make out. It sent a chill down my spine. I asked, "Are you lost?" But she didn't respond. Instead, she started to walk towards me, her steps slow and deliberate. I took a step back, feeling uneasy. That's when I noticed something was terribly wrong. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating towards me. Terrified, I turned and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I found my family. I told them about this strange girl, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was making up stories. We decided to leave the park, but when we reached the exit, the gates were locked. Panic set in. We were trapped inside Disneyland, and it was getting darker by the minute. The once beautiful park now felt like a sinister maze. We tried to find another way out, but every path we took led us deeper into the park. The rides that were once so much fun now seemed menacing and distorted. The carousel that the girl had been near had started moving on its own, playing a haunting tune. As we walked, we heard more whispers. It was like the park itself was speaking to us, but the words were jumbled and incomprehensible. I felt a presence behind us, and when I turned, I saw the girl again, floating towards us with her hair covering her face. My heart was pounding as I shouted at my family to run. We dashed through the darkened park trying to escape this nightmare. The characters that were once our friends now seemed like monsters, lurking in the shadows. Hours passed, and we were exhausted. We had no idea where we were going, and the park seemed to go on forever. The girl was always there, following us, her whispers growing louder and more unsettling. Finally, we came to a clearing in the park, and there, in the center, was a massive, twisted castle. It looked nothing like the Cinderella castle we had seen earlier. It was dark and foreboding, with sharp, jagged spires. The girl floated towards the castle, and as she entered, the gates swung open. We had no choice but to follow. Inside, the air was heavy with a sense of dread. We climbed the winding staircase, and with each step, the whispers grew louder, filling our heads with a cacophony of voices. At the top of the staircase, we found ourselves in a room filled with mirrors. Our reflections were distorted, twisted into grotesque shapes. The girl was there, her face still hidden by her long dark hair. She finally spoke, her voice echoing in the room. "You're trapped here, just like me," I asked her. "What do you want?" She lifted her hair to reveal her face, and I gasped. Her eyes were empty, black voids. "I want you to stay with me," she said, her voice filled with loneliness. We had no choice. We were stuck in this nightmare just like her. As the days turned into weeks, we became part of the haunted Disneyland, our laughter and smiles replaced by fear and despair. So if you ever go to Disneyland, be careful. The happiest place on earth can quickly become the scariest place you've ever been. And you might just find yourself trapped in a never-ending nightmare, just like me. I went to Disneyland one summer with my family. It was supposed to be a magical trip, but it turned into something I'll never forget. We arrived early and the sun was shining brightly. We got our tickets and entered the park. Everything seemed normal at first. We went on rides, ate cotton candy, and met some of our favorite characters. But I started to notice something strange. People around me were acting weird. They had blank looks on their faces like they were in a trance. I tried to ignore it and enjoy the day, but it was hard not to notice. We decided to go on the Haunted Mansion ride. It was always one of my favorites. But this time, something was different. As we entered the dark, spooky mansion, I felt a chill down my spine. The ride was supposed to be fun, but it felt real. The animatronic ghosts looked lifelike, and their voices sounded eerie. My family didn't seem to notice anything strange, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After the ride, we walked around the park some more. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I thought I was just seeing things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. We decided to take a break and have lunch. As we sat at a table, I noticed that the other park-goers were still acting strange. They spoke in hushed voices and avoided eye contact. It was like they were hiding something. I excused myself and went to the restroom. As I washed my hands, I heard whispering coming from one of the stalls. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sent shivers down my spine. I quickly left the restroom and rejoined my family. I didn't want to tell them what I had heard. I didn't want to scare them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with Disneyland. We decided to leave the park early and head back to our hotel. As we walked out of the park gates, I felt a sense of relief. But that relief didn't last long. That night I had a terrible nightmare. I dreamt of the shadowy figure I had seen earlier. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes. It whispered in a language I couldn't understand, and its voice was like nails on a chalkboard. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure from my dream was real. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, but I couldn't convince myself. The next day, we decided to give Disneyland another chance. Maybe I had just been overreacting. But as soon as we entered the park, I knew something was terribly wrong. The park was empty. There were no other visitors, no children laughing, and no music playing. It was like a ghost town. My family and I were the only ones there. We tried to go on some rides, but they were all different. The once cheerful rides had turned into dark, twisted versions of themselves. The teacup ride spun so fast that I thought I was going to be sick. The carousel horses had sinister grins on their faces. We tried to leave, but we couldn't find the exit. It was like the park was a maze, and every path led us back to where we started. Panic started to set in. As we walked through the empty park, we heard whispers all around us. They were in a language I couldn't understand, but they sounded angry and malevolent. I felt like we were being surrounded by something sinister. We finally stumbled upon the Haunted Mansion again. It was different this time. The doors creaked open on their own, and we were pulled inside by an unseen force. The ride was no longer a ride, it was real. The ghosts from the ride had escaped and were floating around us. They reached out with cold, clammy hands and whispered in our ears. I couldn't understand their words, but I could feel their anger and despair. My family and I were trapped in the haunted mansion and there was no way out. The ghosts closed in on us, their faces twisted in anguish. I knew we were in grave danger. Just when all hope seemed lost, a bright light appeared in front of us. It was the shadowy figure from my nightmare. But this time, it felt different. It felt like it was protecting us. The figure spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but its voice was soothing, not terrifying. It gestured for us to follow, and we did. The figure led us through the haunted halls of the mansion, and the ghosts retreated. It was like they were afraid of the figure. We followed it until we reached the exit of the mansion. As we stepped outside, the park had returned to normal. People were laughing and the sun was shining. It was like nothing had ever happened. We left Disneyland that day and never looked back. I don't know what that shadowy figure was or why it saved us, but I'll never forget the horror we experienced at Disneyland. So if you ever go to Disneyland, be careful. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to turn your magical day into a nightmare. My name is Devin, and I'm here to tell you about the time I went to Disneyland, and things got really, really weird. It was just me and my best friend Lori on a bright, sunny day. We were excited to see all our favorite characters and go on the fun rides. We started with the teacup ride, spinning around and laughing. But then, something strange happened. The teacup we were in started spinning faster and faster, and the music got louder and more distorted. We screamed, but nobody seemed to hear us. Finally, the ride stopped and we stumbled out, feeling dizzy and scared. We thought maybe it was just a malfunction, so we decided to try another ride. This time, we chose the Haunted Mansion. It's supposed to be spooky, but we figured it would be fun. As we entered, the door creaked shut behind us and the lights went out. We heard whispers and footsteps, but there was no one there. We tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the room lit up, and we were surrounded by ghostly figures. They looked sad, not scary. One of them reached out to me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then they all disappeared, and the door opened. We rushed out, shaking and scared out of our wits. We decided to take a break and get some cotton candy to calm our nerves. But as we walked to the snack stand, we noticed something odd. Everyone in the park was wearing masks that looked like Mickey Mouse, but their eyes were hollow and dark. They walked around like robots, not speaking or smiling. It was like they weren't even human anymore. We tried to ask a few people what was going on, but they just stared at us with those empty eyes. We felt like we were in some kind of nightmare. We tried to leave the park, but the gates were locked and there was no way out. As night fell, the park took on a completely different vibe. The once bright and cheerful place was now shrouded in darkness. The rides started moving on their own, playing eerie music. The carousel spun around with no one on it, and the Ferris wheel turned by itself. We hid in a small gift shop, hoping to find a phone or some way to contact the outside world. Inside, we found old, dusty toys that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings. It was like we had stepped into another dimension. Suddenly, we heard a child's laughter coming from the back of the shop. We followed the sound and found a door that led to a hidden room. Inside, there was a little girl in a tattered Cinderella dress. She was playing with a broken doll, her eyes empty and lifeless. We asked her if she knew how to get out of the park, but she just kept laughing. It sent shivers down our spines. We turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind us, trapping us with the creepy girl. She started to chant in a language we couldn't understand, and the walls of the room began to close in on us. We screamed and pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Just when we thought we were done for, the door burst open and a beam of light shone in. It was a security guard who had heard our screams. He helped us out of the room and led us to safety. As we left the park, we looked back one last time, and it was as if nothing had ever happened. The sun was shining, people were laughing, and everything seemed normal again. We never went back to Disneyland after that day. We couldn't explain what had happened, and we didn't want to find out. All I can say is sometimes the happiest places can turn into the creepiest nightmares. So if you ever go to Disneyland, be careful and watch out for the things that go bump in the night.